Dorks, what are we blowing up? What? The Vatican? Wow, you guys are going to hell.
The series may be hurtling toward the finish line, but Fast X still sets aside some time to nod towards its roots. From mixing up the formula to some very familiar quotes, here are some of the best callbacks in Fast X. Fast X spends a lot of time calling back to the events of Fast 5. Chief among them is Dante Reyes, the son of Hernan Reyes. Appropriately, the movie opens with a redux of the Fast 5 climax, in which Dom and Brian steal the Reyes safe. This time, though, Dante is there. If you haven't seen the fifth film in a while, you might not notice just how close Fast X slots him into the action. The car he drives during the bridge battle, the one with the minigun that pops out of the top, is pulled straight from the original scene. This creates a fun time loop moment for anyone who goes back to Fast 5 in the future. The later parts of Fast X also make reference to Dante's retcon Fast 5 cameo. He has a base of operations in the abandoned police station where Dom and Brian stole the safe, and he ambushes Dom on the very same bridge, thus reversing his previous defeat there. Typically, Fast and Furious movies end with a family barbecue scene. Fast X changes things up by starting with one instead. This is an early clue that things aren't going to go well in the third act, because the movie ends on a huge cliffhanger, with the lives of multiple major characters hanging in the balance. There's no room for a feel-good finale. The opening cookout is still full of fun little details, though. The whole gang can be seen sipping on Coronas, which have been the unofficial official beer of Fast and Furious since the beginning. You can have any brew you want, as long as it's a Corona. And Roman once again tries to sneak some food before the blessing has been said, just as he has many times before. There's also a cute moment between little Brian and Letty. When Dom walks into the barbecue with his son after their driving lesson, Brian gives Letty a hug and calls her mom. Letty may not actually be Brian's blood mother, but she's raised him as her own since he was incredibly young. It's nice to see how their relationship has blossomed, and the little glimpse of tenderness from Letty is a perfect character moment. Los Bandoleros for life. During the cookout scene at the beginning of Fast X, Dom and Han share a moment of reflection on their thieving origins. In that film, Dom, Han, Letty, Leo, and Santos engaged in a series of small-time heists across the Dominican Republic, striving to secure their livelihoods. Their stint there culminated in a fuel truck robbery gone horribly wrong, the first big action set piece of Fast and Furious. As they reminisce, Han offers a toast, saying, "Los Bandoleros for life." Los Bandoleros is the name of the short film prequel to Fast and Furious, which details how the Doctor crew was first assembled. The Dominican Republic stories are technically Han's earliest entry in the Fast and Furious timeline, not counting Justin Lin's film Better Luck Tomorrow, which serves as an unofficial prequel of sorts. And, of course, Vin Diesel himself actually directed Los Bandoleros, making the reference extra special for Dom as well. When I See You Again, right after his Los Bandoleros reminiscing with Han, Dom takes a moment to glance around his garage and take note of the many family photos he's tacked up on the walls. The camera lingers on several of him and Brian together, and as it does, the piano refrain of See You Again blends in with the original score. The Wiz Khalifa and Charlie Puth anthem was written to commemorate the late Paul Walker, and it became a massive hit in its own right after debuting at the emotional end of Furious. Even in a movie like Fast X, where Brian's absence doesn't really affect the story, it's nice to see Diesel and the crew still take a moment to pay homage to his life and career. After the opening barbecue, Dom gets vulnerable about his fears. Later on in the movie, we get another nod to Letty's brief time working for Owen Shaw. When Tess visits her in prison, she points out a scar on Letty's arm that she got the night she first met Dom, thereby proving that he sent her. Standout cars. In any Fast and Furious movie, there are going to be some standout cars. Sometimes, the vehicles driven by the crew are simply chosen because they look neat, but sometimes they have a deeper meaning. To start, Cypher enters the film behind the wheel of a DeLorean Alpha, a yet-to-be-released limited edition homage to the DeLorean Motor Company's heyday with the iconic DMC-12. The back-to-the-futuristic look of the car is fitting for Cypher's techno-terrorist aesthetic, and since the car isn't out yet, it's safe to assume that she stole one. During the big action sequence in Rome, Han drives a boxy Alfa Romeo with an orange and black color scheme. It's the exact same coloring that his Mazda RX-7 has in the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. And of course, Jakob gets to drive his old Blue Fox body Mustang, which was first seen during the flashback scenes in F9. The Fast Saga, the first big action set piece in Fast X, takes place in Rome, during a mission led by, appropriately, Roman. He, Han, Tej, and Ramsey are tricked by Dante into stealing a bomb, believing that the operation has been commissioned by the agency. Through it all, Roman constantly asserts his own abilities as a leader and takes offense every time the others doubt his chops. While not necessarily an intentional reference, this little arc for Roman is interesting given his history in the saga. He first appeared in Fast and Furious as the replacement for Vin Diesel, who opted to film the Chronicles of Riddick instead. In another timeline, that could have led to Tyrese Gibson being one of the 2 leading co-stars for the series, and Roman quite literally being the leader of the crew. But instead, the character became comic relief under Dom's shadow. For fans of the Fast era, it's fun to see Roman getting a bit of development on the leadership end. Gibson is still more than capable of stealing scenes on his own, and he gets some solid material in Fast X. There is a more specific Fast reference later when Roman reveals that he keeps cash strapped to himself under his clothes. He pulls the exact same move at the end of the second film. The Rome sequence of Fast X is action-packed, but it also includes a number of smaller references. When in Rome ... to the earlier Fast and Furious films. As part of the caper, Ramsey winds up behind the wheel of a big truck carrying a piece of dangerous tech, in this case, a giant bomb. This seems like a clear nod to the Edinburgh sequence in F9, the Fast saga, in which she was forced to drive a truck carrying a super magnet. Letty also chooses to gear up on a motorcycle instead of in a regular car, which is another nod to F9. During the minefield sequence of that film, she's shown to be a master both behind the wheel and behind the handlebars, and as is only right when putting Han inside an orange and black sports car, he does a bit of drifting for the camera, harkening back to his time in Tokyo. Safe and sound, Fast X exhibits a distinct fixation on the vault heist from the iconic finale of Fast 5, surpassing any other element in the Fast and Furious story. The film opens by revisiting the exhilarating chase, providing a fresh perspective through Dante's eyes. Furthermore, it revisits the exact police station and bridge from that pivotal scene, evoking a strong sense of nostalgia. Throughout the movie, there are multiple instances where the vault heist is paid homage, emphasizing its significance within the narrative. The bomb chase in Rome is an obvious nod to the safe robbery. Dante himself acknowledges this, claiming to have set it up as an homage to his family's downfall. Notably, Dante fails to mention an interesting detail. During the Rome sequence, Dom takes the wheel of a Dodge Charger Hellcat. As he chases down Dante and little Brian, Dom is attacked by 2 helicopters that fire grappling hooks into his car and try to lift him off the road. His car gets out just enough horsepower to yank both choppers down in flames, and he uses them both as makeshift melee weapons, just like he once did with the vault. Little Brian quotes his father, "If there's one thing Fast and Furious movies love to do, it's quote the original." And a little ways into the second act of Fast X, little Brian does just that. After he beats his Aunt Mia in a round of Hot Wheels Unleashed, she jokingly chastises him. Brian responds with his own version of this famous quote, "It don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning." It isn't even the first time Brian references that particular scene from the first movie. After his driving lesson with Dom at the beginning of the film, the little guy is frustrated that he can't quite get things right. "You almost had it," his dad says, but Brian responds, "I didn't have it." This is yet another part of that famous scene between Brian O'Connor and Dom. After losing their first street race against each other, Brian tells Dom, "Dude, I almost had you. Almost had me. You never had me. You never had your car." A street race. Even when the Vatican is being bombed and armies of cyber commandos are at the door, Fast and Furious still makes time for some good all-street racing. Let's race. In Fast X, Dom travels back to Rio to confront Dante Reyes. They end up meeting at a racing event, which is reminiscent of the one seen in Fast 5. Interestingly, Diogo, one of the local characters from that film, makes a return and supports Dom during the encounter with Dante. This creates a parallel to the face-off between Hobbs and Dom in Fast 5. We get another little callback during the race itself. Diogo gets a bit too antsy and pops his nos early, making him a target in Dante's twisted game. The too soon nitrous moment is a classic of the franchise, going all the way back to Dom and Brian's first drag. This time, though, the mistake is extra deadly. A cop and a street racer. As it turns out, Isabel is actually the sister of Alina Neves, the late mother of little Brian who was killed by Cypher in the Fate of the Furious. Dom saves her from Dante's bomb and takes her back to Alina's old apartment, where Isabel now lives. She confesses to him how much guilt she used to feel over Alina dying instead of her since her sister was always the good one, and Isabel saw herself as bad. Clearly, this is a reference to his relationship with Brian. which began when the latter was investigating him for DVD player robberies while undercover. Over time, Brian abandoned his law enforcement career to become a full-time crook and brother to Dom. Fear of planes. One of the best storylines in Fast X is the uncle-nephew road trip that Jakob goes on with little Brian. It's a fun, lighthearted distraction from the heavy action of the film, and it yields one particularly poignant moment between the two characters. Holy shikanin cars. No, not that one. While on the trip, Brian admits that he doesn't like planes, prompting his uncle to share how he was once terrified of cars after the accident that killed his father. Of course, the reason Little B is so frightened of planes is he was imprisoned on one as a baby. In a movie where Cypher becomes a begrudging ally, this little moment reminds us of just how vile she truly is. She forever changed the course of Brian's life by taking his mother's in the Fate of the Furious, and though she and Letty have set a temporary truce, she'll have to answer for her crimes eventually. Climax references. The climax chase sequence of Fast X has a few notable nods to the series' past. For instance, when Dom enters the fray, he airdrops out of the back of a cargo plane. Although the Fast X drop is much lower, it might remind viewers of the multi-car airdrop in Furious, which actually involve parachutes. At this point, Dominic Toretto is a true veteran of driving muscle cars out of airplanes. Later, during the standoff atop the dam, Dom is forced to drive straight down the face of the structure in order to save Brian, who's riding in the passenger seat. He barely outruns the explosion caused by Dante, thanks in large part to him hitting the nitrous at the exact right moment. This triggers a CGI NOS infusion shot that harkens back to the series' roots, foreshadowing Giselle's return. Fast X ends with two big twists. First, Giselle appears in the nuclear submarine from the Fate of the Furious to rescue Letty and Cypher from Antarctica. After that, there's a mid-credits scene in which Dwayne Johnson's Luke Hobbs makes his triumphant return to the Fast saga. Both reveals are shocking, but for different reasons. Hobbs' appearance is surprising because of behind-the-scenes issues, while Giselle's is surprising because, well, she died. Even so, her return is foreshadowed by a couple of different moments throughout the film. During the opening cookout, Tej and Roman help Han make a dating profile, but his heart clearly isn't in it. Later, while speaking with Tess, Ames mentions that the Toretto crew was involved in the heist of a nuclear submarine. Letting the audience know that the vessel was never recovered paves the way for it to pop back up at the end of the movie.